The night he left, the rain wouldn't stop. It tapped against my window like 1,000 tiny questions I couldn't answer. I sat there with his jacket in my hands, the one he used to wrap around me when I said I was cold, and I realized I didn't even know who it belonged to anymore. That was the moment everything changed. The moment I understood that love can end quietly, without a single goodbye, leaving you surrounded by echoes of promises that no longer mean anything. I never thought betrayal could feel so gentle. There was no fight, no tears, no slammed doors, just silence. And in that silence, my heart learned a truth I'd never wanted to know. That sometimes the person who teaches you how to trust is the same one who teaches you why you shouldn't. People think heartbreak arrives suddenly, but it doesn't. It grows slowly, like a hairline crack in glass, almost invisible until one day the whole thing shatters in your hands. Looking back, I can trace every fracture, every tiny warning I chose not to see. But back then, I was just a girl, 22, hopeful, foolish, and in love with a man who wore sincerity like a disguise. His name was Arav, and he entered my life the way sunlight slips through old curtains, softly, almost tenderly. I met him in the city when I had just moved there, chasing dreams bigger than my courage. Everything about that place felt unfamiliar. The noise, the crowds, the constant rush. And then there was him, calm, patient, a pause in the chaos. He helped me find my way when I got lost on my second day. I thought it was a coincidence. Now I wonder if fate sometimes hides its warnings behind charm. He wasn't loud or overly confident. He had that quiet kind of confidence that draws you in. The way he listened more than he spoke, the way his eyes made you feel like you mattered. I used to tell my roommate that talking to him felt like reading poetry out loud. Every word hung in the air longer than it should. Our story started the way most heartbreaks do, with laughter. He made me laugh when nothing else in that city could. He remembered details, my favorite cafe, the book I'd been searching for, the fact that I hated the sound of ticking clocks. Each little thing he noticed became another reason to believe that maybe, finally, someone truly saw me. He called me his peace. I didn't realize then how heavy a word that was. Peace shouldn't depend on another person. It should live inside you. But I let him make me his calm, his safe space, his everything. And when you become someone's everything, you forget to be your own. There were signs, subtle, fleeting, easy to ignore. The late-night calls that ended when I entered the room, the sudden change of expression when I asked simple questions. Once, while scrolling through his phone to show him a photo I'd taken, I saw a message notification. Just a name I didn't recognize, and 3 words that burned themselves into my memory. I miss you too. He took the phone from my hand too quickly, smiled too softly, said, "It's nothing, trust me." Trust. That word was a promise and a weapon at the same time. I told myself that love meant believing even when things didn't make sense. I told myself that doubt was poison, that maybe I was overthinking. That's the problem with gentlemen. They make you question your own instincts before you ever question them. The night before everything ended, he came over drenched in rain. I remember the water dripping from his hair, the scent of wet earth filling my small apartment. He wrapped me in his arms and whispered, "You think too much." I wanted to tell him that thinking too much was how I survived, but instead I laughed, because that's what love does. It turns your fears into jokes, your intuition into silence. If I had paid attention that night, the hesitation in his touch, the way he darted toward his phone, I might have understood what was coming. But love makes us blind to the obvious. We only see what we're desperate to believe. Now when I replay those memories, every detail feels sharper. The tone of his voice, the tremble in his hands, the way he said, "I'll always be here." I didn't know always had an expiration date. People ask me when I knew it was over. The truth is, I didn't. Not then. I kept holding on, even as he was letting go. And when he finally walked away, it wasn't anger I felt. It was emptiness, a quiet, unbearable stillness that filled every corner of me. That night, the rain didn't stop. And for the first time in my life, I understood why storms are so loud, because silence after betrayal is louder. The next morning, the rain had stopped, but my world hadn't dried. The air still felt heavy, like the city itself was mourning something it didn't understand. His jacket lay on my chair, damp and crumpled, smelling faintly of him. That familiar mix of cologne and comfort that now felt like a ghost. I stared at it for hours before realizing it wasn't the jacket I missed. It was the version of me who used to feel safe when he wore it. He hadn't called. Not that morning, not that night, not for 3 days after. I told myself he was busy. I checked his social media, even though I promised myself I wouldn't. Every new post felt like a wound, a story without me, a smile that wasn't meant for me. He was still out there, living, laughing, existing, while I sat in silence, waiting for an explanation that never came. That's the cruelest part of heartbreak. It doesn't break you all at once. It comes in waves. One moment you think you're fine, and the next, a single memory pulls you under again. I still remember the 4th day, the day I decided to go to his apartment. I had never done that before. He always preferred to meet outside, in cafes, parks, anywhere but his place. His landlord's strict, he'd say. I believed him because love makes you believe even the unbelievable. I took a bus across the city, clutching a small paper bag with his favorite snack. I thought maybe he'd been sick, maybe something had happened. My heart was too kind to consider the truth. When I reached his building, the guard at the entrance looked confused. He said, "Madam, he shifted out 2 days ago." My mouth dried. "Shifted?" I asked. "Where?" He shrugged, didn't say. He came with a girl, looked happy. That sentence shattered something inside me. A girl looked happy. Those 2 words echoed in my head like a cruel joke. I stood there, smiling like I hadn't just heard my world collapse. I thanked the guard, turned around and walked away. My feet moved, but I didn't feel them. It was like walking inside a dream I never wanted to see. When I got home, I sat on the floor and opened my phone. His number was still saved under R of HE. My fingers hovered over the call button, trembling. I dialed. It rang. Once. Twice. Then disconnected. Not rejected. Just ended. I tried again. Same thing. And again, until my tears blurred the screen. That night, I didn't cry loudly. I just sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker, listening to the city breathe without me. My roommate knocked on the door, worried. I told her I was fine. I wasn't. I was drowning quietly in the same trust I once thought would save me. Over the next few days, denial became my survival. I told myself there had to be a reason. Maybe family issues, maybe a misunderstanding, anything but betrayal. Because the truth felt too heavy to name. But truth has a way of finding you, even when you hide from it. A week later, one of my college friends sent me a message. "Hey, isn't this your Arav?" Attached was a photo, him at a beach, smiling, his arm wrapped around another girl. The caption read, "Here's to new beginnings." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened, my vision blurred, and I felt something inside me collapse completely. It wasn't jealousy I felt, it was grief. Grief for the girl that I had been, for the love that I had believed in, for the trust that I had given so freely. I deleted the message, but not before saving the photo. I don't know why. Maybe because part of me still needed proof that it was real, that the man I loved had chosen someone else without even saying goodbye. Days blurred into nights after that. I stopped checking my phone, stopped leaving my apartment, stopped answering anyone who cared. My friends tried to pull me out, but I wasn't ready. Pain has its own pace, and I was still learning how to live with the silence he left behind. Sometimes I'd sit by the window with his old jacket draped across my knees. It's strange. I hated the city before I met him, and now I hated it because of him. Every street corner, every coffee shop, every raindrop carried his name. And yet, even then, I couldn't hate him. That was the cruelest truth of all. Even broken, my heart still defended him. Even shattered, it whispered, maybe he'll come back. But he didn't.
After he left, the world kept spinning, but I didn't. Days melded into one another like ink in water, color fading, meaning dissolving. People said, time heals everything. But time doesn't heal what you refuse to let go of. It just hides the wound under new routines. I stopped wearing colors for a while. Everything in my closet felt too bright for the way my chest ached. I'd wake up, scroll through the same old messages, reread them like scripture, searching for a sign that he had loved me at all. Every good morning text, every be safe, every I miss you, they looked so pure once, but now they felt rehearsed, like lines in a play where I'd been the only one who believed it was real. My friends told me to block him, to erase him, to move on. But how do you delete a person who lives inside every thought you have? So instead, I began searching for reasons. Because heartbreak isn't just about losing someone, it's about needing to know why. Why he left. Why I wasn't enough. Why love can change its name overnight. A month after the beach photo, I saw him again. It wasn't planned. The city is cruel like that. It lets you run in circles until you collide with what you're not ready to face. I was at the metro station, headphones in, pretending to be fine, when I saw that familiar stride. He looked different, somehow lighter, freer. He was laughing with a girl whose hand fit perfectly into his, the same girl from the photo. For a second, our eyes met. I froze. He blinked, as if unsure whether to acknowledge me. Then he smiled, that same soft, careful smile that once made me believe in forever, and nodded before walking away. No guilt, no hesitation, just closure I never asked for. I stood there long after the train left, the noise of the crowd fading into a low hum. It felt like watching my own life continue without me. And in that moment, I understood something painful. He hadn't left because of me. He'd left because the version of me that loved him didn't fit the story he wanted anymore. That realization broke me in a different way, because now it wasn't about betrayal, it was about replacement. He didn't just leave, he moved on. Easily, effortlessly, as if everything we had was a pause between chapters of his real life. That night, I sat by the window again, rainlight pooling on the floor, and I wrote a letter I never planned to send. It began with, "I hope you're happy." I lied in every line. I told him I forgave him, that I'd learned something, that I wished him peace, but halfway through, my pen slipped and the ink smeared into a single honest sentence. "You made me doubt the meaning of love." I stared at that line for a long time, because it was true. He had changed what love meant to me. It wasn't laughter or comfort anymore. It was suspicion, silence, and the constant fear of being replaced. Still, part of me couldn't hate him. Maybe because hating him meant admitting that I'd chosen wrong. Maybe because part of love is refusing to let go even when it hurts. 2 weeks later, I got an answer I hadn't asked for. A mutual friend messaged me out of nowhere. He wanted to tell you he's sorry. He said he couldn't handle how much you loved him. I read that line over and over. Couldn't handle how much I loved him? What does that even mean? Love wasn't supposed to be something to handle. It was supposed to be something to hold. That night, I realized something I'd never understood before. Some people fall in love with your light, but they leave when they realize it also casts shadows. He loved the version of me that made him feel strong, not the real me who sometimes needed saving too. I didn't reply to that message. I didn't cry either. Instead, I opened the window, let the night breeze touch my face, and whispered to myself, "You loved the wrong person the right way." And somehow, that made it easier to breathe. The next morning, I packed his jacket into a box with the letters I'd never sent. Not to forget, but to stop carrying him in places he didn't belong anymore. Because healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about deciding it no longer controls the present. As I sealed the box, I caught my reflection in the mirror. For the first time in months, I saw something in my eyes I hadn't seen before. Not sadness, strength. The kind that comes after you survived what you thought would destroy you.
Healing never announces itself. It doesn't arrive with trumpets or sunlight pouring through curtains. It begins quietly, on an ordinary morning when you realized you've gone 5 minutes without thinking about them. That was my first step back. 5 minutes. It felt like a lifetime. The city that once felt haunted began to look different. I started noticing colors again. The green of the park near my building, the orange reflection of evening light on windows, the deep blue of rain clouds that used to make me cry. Every shade looked new, like someone had turned the world back on. Maybe heartbreak doesn't darken the world. Maybe it teaches you how bright it can be when you finally open your eyes. I forced myself out of the apartment one Sunday morning. The air smelled of cardamom tea and fresh bread from the street bakery. For weeks, I'd avoided crowds because every stranger reminded me of him. But that day, the noise felt alive instead of overwhelming. I walked with no destination, just to feel the ground beneath me again. A group of children ran past, chasing a kite that kept tangling in electric wires. One of them fell, laughed, got up again, and I realized that's what healing looks like. Falling, laughing, trying again. I stopped at a small cafe. The waiter asked, "Table for two?" I smiled and said, "Just one." It sounded strange in my own ears, but strangely freeing too. The last time I'd been there, I'd sat across from him. He'd ordered for me without asking, like he always did. That day, I ordered for myself. I didn't need someone to decide what I liked. While waiting for my coffee, I pulled out my notebook, the same one where I used to write him letters I never sent. The first page was still filled with his name, bold and careless, but I turned past it and began to write something new. This is not about him anymore. This is about me. Words poured out like air after holding your breath too long. I wrote about mornings and music and the tiny apartment that had seen all my tears, but still kept me safe. I wrote about how strange it felt to eat alone and not feel lonely. And as the ink dried, I realized my story wasn't over. It had just changed narrators. For the first time, I was writing for myself. When I got home, I placed the notebook by the window and watched the wind ruffle the pages. The sound reminded me of laughter, mine this time. It startled me. Light, honest, unexpected. The echo of someone I used to be, before love had turned heavy. I didn't recognize her completely, but I wanted to. So I decided to keep going, even on the hard days, even when memories tried to drag me back. Healing isn't a straight line. Some mornings I still woke up reaching for my phone, expecting a message that would never come. Some nights I caught myself scrolling through old pictures, whispering,
why, into the dark. But each time it hurt a little less. Each time the silence felt a little more peaceful. A few weeks later, my roommate convinced me to join her for a painting class. I laughed at first. I could barely draw a straight line. But she said, "You don't paint to be perfect. You paint to be present." So I went. The studio smelled of turpentine and rain-soaked canvas. The teacher told us to paint how we felt. I dipped my brush into blue, then yellow, then red. By the end, the canvas looked like a storm meeting sunrise. Messy, chaotic, beautiful. When the teacher asked what it was, I said, "It's me, learning how to start again." He smiled. "Then it's perfect." That night, I hung the painting above my bed. It wasn't pretty, but it was honest. And for the first time, my walls held something that came from my own hands, not from memories of him. Little by little, life began to fit again. Not perfectly, but comfortably. I went back to work, began saving for a trip, reconnected with friends I'd pushed away. They didn't ask about him anymore, and I didn't offer to talk. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was understanding. They knew that sometimes strength speaks loudest in what you choose not to say. One evening, while cleaning, I found his jacket again. The one I thought I'd boxed away. For a moment, I hesitated. Then I folded it neatly, placed it in a donation bag, and whispered, "Someone else needs warmth more than I need memories." When I dropped it off at the shelter, I didn't cry. Instead, I felt lighter, like I'd returned something that was never truly mine. On my way home, the sky opened up, rain falling in slow, silver sheets. I didn't run for cover this time. I let it soak through my hair, my clothes, my thoughts. Because the rain that once reminded me of him now belonged to me again. Each drop felt like a small baptism, washing away what hurt, but leaving behind what mattered. When I got home, I stood in front of the mirror. My reflection looked back, tired but alive, scarred but stronger. I smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because I was still here, still standing, still learning that the heart, no matter how broken, always finds a way to beat again.
It happened on an ordinary Tuesday, the kind of day that slips by unnoticed, until it doesn't. I had just finished my shift at the small design studio where I'd started working a few months earlier. The air smelled of rain again, faint and distant, like an old memory trying to find its way back. I tucked my sketchbook under my arm and hurried across the street toward the cafe I'd begun calling my place. It wasn't special. Cracked tables, dim lights, the quiet hum of conversations, but it had become the one corner of the city that belonged entirely to me. I ordered my usual: black coffee, 2 sugars, a touch of cinnamon. As I waited, I pulled out my notebook and began sketching shapes that made no sense. Circles, raindrops, bits of words that didn't fit together. I was lost in thought when the bell above the door rang. Something in me froze before I even looked up. It's strange how the body remembers pain, faster than the mind. When I finally lifted my eyes, he was there. Arav, the man I had once built my world around, standing just a few feet away, laughing with someone at the counter. His hair was shorter, his posture a little straighter, his face still painfully familiar. And then, for a split second, his eyes found mine. Time didn't slow down. It stopped altogether. Everything, the chatter, the music, the clinking cups, fell away until there was only the sound of my heartbeat pounding in my ears. He froze too. That same small smile touched his lips, uncertain this time, almost shy. "Hey," he said, like we were strangers meeting for the first time. I wanted to be angry, to throw every question I ever buried right at him. But all I could manage was a small nod and a voice that barely sounded like mine. "Hi." He gestured toward the seat across from me. "Can I?" I could have said no. I should have. But curiosity, that dangerous, familiar feeling, whispered, "Just once more." So, I nodded. He sat down. The silence between us was thick, awkward, almost tender in its unease. He asked, "How have you been?" softly. I almost laughed. How do you answer that to the person who broke you? I said, "I've been learning." He smiled. "That sounds like you." For a moment, we both stared at the same table scratch, pretending not to notice the ghost of our past sitting between us. He started talking first, about work, about how he'd moved to another part of the city, about her, though he didn't say her name. He said, "She's gone." Finally, eyes lowering. Things didn't work out. Something inside me twisted, but not the way it once would have. The pain was dull now, almost kind, a bruise instead of an open wound. I said quietly, "I'm sorry," and I meant it. He looked up, searching my face. "You seem different, maybe. Happier?" I replied, "I am. For a long time I wasn't, but I am now." He nodded slowly, as if trying to understand the version of me sitting in front of him. He said suddenly, "You hated rain." I smiled faintly. "I used to. Not anymore." For the first time, I saw it, the flicker of guilt in his eyes, the realization that I had moved forward without him. And yet, beneath that guilt, there was something else. Relief, maybe. The kind that comes when the person you hurt no longer bleeds because of you. He said, "I never meant to disappear like that," voice trembling slightly. "I know." I replied, "You meant to leave, not disappear. There's a difference." He looked away. He said, "I wasn't good for you." I corrected him gently. "You weren't ready for me." That broke him a little. I could see it, the way his shoulders slumped, the way his fingers fidgeted with his cup. He wanted forgiveness, but forgiveness isn't something you ask for. It's something time gives, quietly. And time had already done its job. After a long pause, he whispered, "I missed you." I looked at him, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the old ache. I said, "I missed who I thought you were, but not you." We both sat in silence after that. The kind that used to feel comforting now felt complete. When the rain started again outside, he glanced toward the window. "You still like watching it?" I said, "Yes," smiling softly, "but it's mine now." He laughed quietly, a sound that no longer reached me. When he stood to leave, he hesitated. "You look happy, really." "I'm glad." I said, "Me too." And I meant it. He nodded, walked to the door, and this time, he didn't look back. I sat there for a long time, staring at the raindrops sliding down the glass, realizing that closure doesn't come from apologies or explanations. It comes when you finally stop needing them. That evening when I got home, I opened my notebook and wrote one final line beneath his name. We met again, and I felt nothing. That's how I knew I was free. Then, I turned the page and began to write something new, a story not about loss, but about living. The morning after seeing him again felt oddly still. I woke before the alarm, sunlight already warming the edges of the curtains. For the first time in years, my chest didn't tighten when I opened my eyes. It was quiet, but not the heavy, suffocating quiet I used to know. This silence was clean, like the pause between heartbeats. It meant peace.
I made coffee and let the radio play whatever it wanted. No sad playlists, no songs that reminded me of anyone. The voice of an old singer filled the kitchen, and I caught myself humming along. It startled me. That simple sound, a tune, careless and off-key, felt like proof that I was finally alive again. Healing had turned into habit. I walked to work instead of taking the bus, learned the names of the shopkeepers along the way, started smiling at strangers. At the studio, I took on projects that scared me. Campaigns, murals, layouts I used to think were beyond me. And when I succeeded, I didn't rush to tell anyone. I just stood there, proud in silence. The world hadn't changed. I had. In the evenings, I began sketching again, not to impress anyone, not to fill empty time, but to listen to myself. My sketches were messy, full of color and movement, nothing like the neat, symmetrical lines I once drew when life needed to look perfect. I hung one on my wall, a swirl of blues and golds. It reminded me of rain meeting sunlight, chaos finding balance. One Friday, my friend Naina convinced me to attend an art market downtown. "You need to show your work," she said. I laughed. "It's not ready." She rolled her eyes. "Neither are you. That's why we're going." The market buzzed with people, painters, musicians, dreamers. It smelled of canvas, coffee, and possibility. I set up a small corner with 3 of my pieces. I didn't expect anyone to stop, but they did. An elderly woman told me one of my paintings reminded her of the sea her husband loved. A little boy said the colors looked like happiness running. Their words melted something inside me that years of love and loss hadn't touched. Validation without attachment. As the sun dipped, a man stopped by my stall. He wasn't striking or dramatic, just ordinary in a calm way that felt different from the chaos I once chased. He studied a painting quietly before saying, "You paint movement like it's alive." I smiled. Maybe because I finally am. He introduced himself, Kabir, a photographer. We talked about art, light, and the strange comfort of watching people without being seen. There was no electricity, no instant spark, just ease. And after everything I'd lived through, ease felt like the rarest miracle. When the market closed, he helped me pack my canvases. Before leaving, he said, "You should keep painting storms. You make them look gentle." I wanted to tell him that gentleness is what happens when storms stop scaring you. Instead, I simply said, "Thank you." It was enough. That night, walking home beneath streetlights, I realized I hadn't thought of Arav once during the entire day. The freedom of that realization brought tears. Quiet ones, the kind that cleanse rather than sting. Because freedom isn't forgetting someone, it's remembering without losing yourself in the memory. The next morning, I started something new, a project called The Sound of Rain. It would be a series of paintings paired with short notes, my way of telling stories through color and silence. Each canvas would hold a piece of me that once belonged to pain, now turned into art. It felt right, giving my heartbreak a purpose. Maybe we can't rewrite the past, but we can repaint it. Weeks turned into months. Kabir and I crossed paths often at the studio where I exhibited my work. He never pushed, never demanded, never promised anything he couldn't keep. He simply showed up, with quiet consistency that felt almost foreign. Sometimes we'd sit on the gallery steps after closing, sharing tea and watching rain ripple across the pavement. He'd point out how light danced on the puddles, how every drop carried its own reflection. And in those small moments, I began to understand something my younger self never did. Love doesn't have to arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it walks in softly, like rain through an open window. But I was careful, not guarded, just aware. I didn't hand over my heart this time. I let it breathe beside me. I learned to listen to my own quiet before trusting someone else's. And strangely, that made everything feel more real. One evening, Kabir asked, "Do you ever paint people?" I smiled. "Only when they leave." He nodded thoughtfully. "Then maybe someday you'll paint someone who stays." That sentence settled in me like a seed. Not a promise, just a possibility. As I locked up the studio that night, thunder rolled far away. The sky smelled of another storm coming. But I wasn't afraid. I had survived worse. And now, storms didn't mean endings. They meant beginnings waiting to wash the dust away. It's strange how quickly peace can turn into fear when you've known heartbreak. For weeks after Kabir entered my life, every gentle gesture felt like a test I was destined to fail. He would text, "Did you eat?" And I'd hesitate before replying, afraid that answering too fast might make me seem eager. Answering too slow might make me seem cold. That's what old pain does. It teaches you to measure love in seconds and silences. But Kabir wasn't in a hurry. He had a patience that unnerved me, the kind that doesn't demand explanations. He'd simply smile and say, "It's okay. Talk when you're ready." No guilt, no pressure. It was disarming. After years of holding my heart like a fragile thing, I didn't know what to do with someone who treated it as something strong. We began to meet after work. Sometimes we walked through crowded streets. Sometimes we sat by the sea, not talking at all. He'd photograph light falling through broken windows, or reflections in puddles, or people lost in thought. He'd say, "Everything looks softer when you notice the small things." And maybe that's why I started noticing myself again. The curve of my laugh, the sound of my steps, the way my reflection no longer looked like a stranger. One evening, as we walked along the pier, he asked quietly, "Who taught you to be so careful with happiness?" I looked at him, startled by how gently he asked. "The same person who taught me what losing it feels like," I said. He nodded, not prying further. That's what made him different. He didn't want to fix me. He wanted to understand the shape of my silence. At home, I found myself replaying our conversations. They weren't about forever or promises or grand gestures. They were about everyday things: music, light, coffee, the meaning of small kindnesses. And somewhere in that simplicity, trust began to grow again, slow and fragile like green shoots after winter. Still, the ghosts weren't gone. Some nights I woke from dreams where I was running through rain, calling out for someone who never turned around. I'd sit up, breathing hard, telling myself that memory can't hurt what's already healed. But scars ache when the weather changes, and hearts are no different. One afternoon, Kabir asked to see my new painting. I hesitated. It was a self-portrait, unfinished, messy, all storm and color. When I finally showed it to him, he stared for a long time. He said, "It's beautiful." I corrected, "It's chaotic." He smiled. "So are most beautiful things." I didn't realize I was crying until he reached out and wiped a tear away with his thumb. Not possessively, not dramatically, just gently, like someone touching a page they don't want to smudge. That small act frightened me more than the heartbreak ever had, because this was real. This was present, and I wasn't sure if I deserved it. Later that night, I stood on my balcony, watching the city lights. I thought about how love had once felt like drowning, deep, consuming, impossible to breathe through. And now it felt like air, soft, quiet, invisible, but necessary. Maybe I was learning that love doesn't always have to hurt to be real. The next day, I visited my mother. She had watched me crumble once before, and the worry never truly left her eyes. When she saw me smiling, she said, "You look different, Betta." Different how? Like you're not waiting for someone to save you anymore.
I hugged her and whispered, "I'm not." And for the first time, I meant it. That evening, Kabir and I met at the same cafe where I'd once seen Arav again. The same window, the same smell of cinnamon and rain. I realized the universe has a strange sense of humor, bringing you back to the same places just to show you how much you've changed. Kabir looked up from his coffee. "What are you thinking?" "That maybe everything really does happen for a reason," I said. He tilted his head. "Even heartbreak?" I replied, "Especially heartbreak. Without it, I wouldn't have known what peace looks like." He smiled, a quiet curve that reached his eyes. And in that moment, I knew that my heart hadn't stopped trusting after all. It had simply been waiting for someone who knew how to hold it without closing his hand.
Peace is a fragile thing. You spend months building it, one breath at a time, and it takes only a single moment, a word, a memory, a glance, to shake its balance. For a while, my life moved smoothly. Work was steady, my art had found small admirers, and Kabir's quiet presence had turned my days from waiting into living. But even the gentlest sea hides undercurrents, and mine began to stir on an afternoon that looked like every other. It started with a message from an unknown number. "I saw him today. Thought you should know." No name, no context. Just that single line glowing on my screen like a spark threatening to light old fires. I stared at it for a long time, my pulse quickening, the air in my chest tightening. Every part of me knew who him meant. Arav. 2 syllables that once felt like music now sounded like a challenge. It had been months since our last encounter. I hadn't spoken his name aloud in even longer. I deleted the message, but couldn't delete the unease it left behind. That night, Kabir called. His voice was warm as ever. "You sound tired. Long day?" I almost told him about the message, but the words lodged in my throat. I didn't want the past leaking into what we were slowly building. So I lied. A small, harmless lie, the kind you tell yourself is for protection. "I just have a little headache," I said. "Then rest," he replied. "I'll call tomorrow." When the call ended, the silence felt heavier than it should have. I realized I was afraid, not of Arav returning, but of what his memory could still do to me. Had I truly moved on, or had I just built a prettier cage around the pain? The next morning, I tried to shake it off. I drowned myself in work, colors, music, anything to stay ahead of thought. But while painting, I spilled a streak of crimson across the canvas. It bled into the blue beneath, turning violet, the exact shade of the jacket Arav used to wear. My brush froze, mid-air. Even the colors remembered. That evening, Kabir dropped by unexpectedly with tea and samosas. He noticed the half-finished painting, the tension in my shoulders. "Bad day?" I corrected, "Old day." He didn't press. Instead, he handed me the tea and said, "Let's watch the rain." We sat by the window, 2 quiet silhouettes framed by silver light. And somewhere between thunder and silence, I told him the truth. About the message, about the way one ghost sentence had undone my calm. He listened without interruption. When I finished, he simply said, "You don't have to fight the memories. Let them visit, just don't let them unpack." His words landed softly but firmly. I smiled weakly. "Easier said than done." He replied, "Most good things are." For a moment, I wondered if Arav would ever understand how much strength it took not to hate him. Hate would have been simpler. It gives you purpose. But choosing peace every day, that was the harder path. A week passed. The message still lingered at the edges of thought, but the panic had faded. I began to realize something important. The past only has power if you keep answering when it calls. And I was tired of answering. Kabir invited me to join him on a weekend photography trip outside the city. Part of me hesitated, old reflex, but the other part, the one that had learned how to breathe again, said yes. We drove through green hills and small villages, stopping to capture bursts of sunlight on wet leaves. At one point, he handed me his camera. "Your turn." "I don't know how." He said, "Then learn." So I did. Awkwardly at first, then with growing confidence. Through that lens, I saw the world differently. Angles, distances, light. And when I looked at Kabir through it, I saw something even more precious: stability. That night, under a sky thick with stars, he said quietly, "You know, you don't have to keep being brave all the time." I turned toward him. "And what if I stop?" He said, "Then I'll remind you that you already survived the worst." I didn't answer, but for the first time since love had broken me, I believed it. Back home, I opened my notebook and wrote, "Peace isn't the absence of storms. It's learning how to dance while it rains." I underlined it twice. Then I tore out the page and pinned it to my wall, where fear used to hang. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the window, bright and unapologetic. My phone buzzed again. Another message from the same unknown number. "He asked about you." My hands trembled. For a second, I thought of deleting it, but then I typed 3 words I never imagined I'd send. "Tell him nothing." When I hit send, I felt something shift inside me. Not triumph, not anger, just quiet certainty. That was the moment I finally stopped being a chapter in someone else's story and began writing my own without hesitation.
For weeks after that final message, the quiet returned. But this time, it didn't feel fragile. It felt earned. I woke each morning with a strange steadiness in my chest, as if my heart, after years of stumbling, had finally found its rhythm again. Still, peace doesn't mean perfection. It just means you're ready for whatever comes next. And what came next, well, was life itself. Kabir's exhibition was scheduled for late spring. He'd been working for months, traveling across villages and cities, capturing moments that most people walked past without noticing. When he asked me to help curate the layout, I agreed, half out of curiosity, half out of fear. Fear of being seen again, not as someone's mistake or heartbreak, but as someone's partner in creation. The gallery smelled of fresh paint and nervous energy. Photographs lined the white walls like windows into small, quiet worlds. An old man repairing shoes, children chasing pigeons, a woman looking out of a train window. Each frame hummed with tenderness. As I stood there adjusting the lighting, Kabir joined me. He said, "You always look at things like they're about to disappear." I smiled. "Maybe because I know how it feels when they do." He nodded. "Then don't let this one vanish too fast." The night of the opening, the room was alive with people. Laughter, soft music, the click of wine glasses. I watched Kabir move through the crowd, graceful, patient, always listening more than speaking. There was pride in my chest, but also a quiet tremor of doubt. Could I trust a calm that looked so much like happiness? What if it slipped through my fingers again? Halfway through the evening, an older woman stopped by my side. "You're the artist, aren't you?" "I helped a little," I replied. She smiled knowingly. "No, dear. I mean the artist who painted that." She pointed toward one of my canvases displayed near the entrance. I hadn't known Kabir would include it. It was the self-portrait I had shown him months ago. Raw, imperfect, streaked with rain and sunlight. Underneath, he had written a small card. "The moment we stop hiding our storms, we start to see the rainbow." I froze. That line wasn't his. It was mine, scribbled once in my journal. He must have remembered. something warm rose behind my ribs, almost like tears, but gentler. For so long, I had begged to be seen. Now I was, and it didn't scare me. After the guests began to leave, Kabir and I stood alone in the gallery. "You put it up without telling me," I said. "I wanted you to see yourself the way I do." I laughed softly. "And how's that?" "Whole." That word broke me open. Not the shattering kind of break, the kind that lets light in. I stepped closer, close enough to see my reflection in his eyes. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "You know what scares me most? Not losing you, but hurting you without meaning to." I reached for his hand. "Then promise we'll speak before we break." He nodded. "Always." Weeks passed, and life settled into its gentle rhythm again. Shared mornings, separate dreams, respect for silence. One rainy afternoon, while cleaning my room, I found an old box tucked beneath the bed. Inside lay pieces of my past, letters, photographs, scraps of poems. At the bottom was a small note in Arab's handwriting. "You made me better. I'm sorry I couldn't make you happy." My hands trembled slightly as I read it, not from pain, but from memory. I realized I no longer needed to hold it to remember who I had been. I folded it once and dropped it in the trash. Not out of anger, but out of peace. That night, I told Kabir about it. He listened quietly, then asked, "And how do you feel?" I said, "Lighter. Like I finally stopped walking backwards." He smiled. "Then maybe it's time to start running forward." We laughed, and the sound filled the room like sunlight. The girl who once measured love in tears and silence was gone. In her place stood someone who knew that love could be soft and still be strong. Later, while watching the rain through our window, I thought of every version of myself I had been. The dreamer, the broken one, the survivor, the artist. Each had left something behind: fear, hope, art, courage. And together, they had built the woman standing here now.
It's strange how life quietly circles back to give meaning to everything you thought was wasted. Months after Kabir's exhibition, the owner of a small art center reached out. She'd seen my work at the gallery and asked if I'd consider teaching a weekend workshop for young artists, most of them teenagers, some shy, some restless, all searching for a voice. The idea both thrilled and terrified me. For years, I had painted my emotions but never spoken them. Now, suddenly, I was being asked to guide others through their own storms. The first Saturday, I arrived early. The room smelled of turpentine and wet brushes, sunlight spilling through tall windows. 10 students sat waiting, a mix of excitement and uncertainty on their faces. I smiled and said, "I'm not here to teach you how to paint. I'm here to help you learn how to feel before you paint." They looked puzzled at first, but as the hours passed, their hesitation began to soften. A boy named Arush painted quiet fields filled with endless rain. A girl named Naya painted broken clocks and said time scared her. Every canvas was a confession, every stroke a whisper. Watching them, I saw my younger self in all their trembling hands, the fear of being seen, the hope of being understood. By the third week, they began to talk more freely. During one session, Naya asked, "Did you always know what you wanted to paint?" I hesitated before answering. "No," I said softly, "I only knew what I wanted to forget." The room went silent. Then she nodded slowly and I realized the truth. Sometimes the best thing you can give others is your honesty. After class, I sat alone among the drying canvases. The sun dipped low, painting everything gold. And for the first time, I felt that the ache I once carried wasn't a burden anymore. It was fuel. All the pain, the heartbreak, the silence, it had been shaping me for this moment where I could finally give what I had learned. That survival is also an art. One evening, Kabir joined me at the studio. He walked through the rows of student paintings, smiling. He said, "You built something here." I shook my head. They built it. I just gave them permission to not be perfect. He laughed quietly. That might be the best kind of teacher. A few weeks later, the Art Center invited me to speak at their annual exhibition. They wanted me to share my story, not just my paintings. The thought of standing before a crowd, unraveling memories I'd buried for years, made my hands shake. But Kabir's words echoed in my mind. You don't have to keep being brave alone. So, I said yes. The night of the exhibition, the hall was softly lit. Rows of chairs filled the room, the faint smell of paint still lingering in the air. My students sat in the front row, eyes bright with pride. I stepped onto the small stage, my heart thudding like a second voice. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then I took a breath and said, "My name is Mira, and for a long time, I believed broken things couldn't be beautiful." The audience stilled. I told them about my first heartbreak without naming names, about losing myself in someone else's reflection, about the years of silence that followed. I spoke of how painting saved me, how color became the language my pain couldn't speak, and finally I told them about healing, how it doesn't arrive like thunder, but like dawn, slow, gentle, unnoticed until it fills the room. When I finished, there was a hush. Then slowly people began to clap, not out of politeness, but with the kind of warmth that says, "We understand." Among them, Kabir's eyes met mine. He didn't smile this time. He just looked proud, the kind of pride that comes from watching someone become everything they were meant to be. Afterwards, a woman approached me. She was in her 30s, eyes red from crying. She said, "Your words felt like mine. I thought I was the only one." I took her hands and whispered, "You never were." And in that moment, I knew that my story no longer belonged to me. It belonged to everyone who had ever stayed silent in their pain. That night, back home, I placed a small canvas on my easel and began to paint. Not rain this time, not storms, just a single open window and sunlight streaming through it. At the bottom, I wrote, "There is no shame in surviving. The shame is in forgetting that you did." As the paint dried, I realized that every heartbreak, every tear, every sleepless night had led to this, not the end, but the understanding. Love had once broken me, but life had patiently taught me how to rebuild.
2 weeks after the exhibition, the Art Center posted a short clip of my talk online. I didn't expect much, but within days, it spread far beyond our small city, shared by strangers who found pieces of themselves in my words. Comments flooded in, stories of heartbreak, healing, starting over. People wrote things like, "You put into words what I never could." For the first time, I realized my pain had turned into language for others. It no longer felt heavy. It felt useful. The recognition was quiet but steady. Local newspapers called. Small podcasts invited me to speak. Each time I told my story, it hurt a little less, as though every retelling loosened the last knot inside my chest. Kabir watched all of this unfold with that same gentle pride, never stepping in, never taking credit. He'd simply say, "Keep telling it. Someone out there needs to hear it." One evening, as I scrolled through messages, one caught my eye. No name, just a single sentence. "I watched your video. I'm sorry." I stared at it for a long time. I didn't need a signature to know who it was. Arav. My first instinct was to ignore it, to protect the peace I had worked so hard to build. But a voice inside me whispered, "You can answer without reopening the wound." So I typed, "Thank you. I hope you're healing too." And that was it. No anger, no nostalgia, just a quiet full stop at the end of a long, complicated sentence. When I told Kabir later, he nodded. "That's forgiveness," he said. "Forgiveness?" I asked. It felt more like acceptance. He smiled.
That's all forgiveness really is. Life began to bloom in ways I hadn't planned. My students from the workshop organized their own small showcase, calling it the Art of Surviving. They asked me to open the event. Standing before them, I saw a reflection of everything I'd once feared: uncertainty, hope, vulnerability, and I felt nothing but gratitude. I told them, pain doesn't define us, it shapes us, but it's love of ourselves, of life, that completes us. After the applause faded, I looked out at the crowd and saw a young girl wiping tears from her cheeks. She couldn't have been more than 16. Later, she approached me, voice trembling. "Your story made me want to live again," she said. I hugged her, fighting back tears of my own. In that moment, I knew my journey had come full circle. The broken girl I once was had finally helped someone else stand back up. That night, I returned home to find Kabir waiting on the balcony, camera slung around his neck. The city lights shimmered below, and a soft drizzle began to fall. He looked at me and said, "It's raining again." I smiled. "I know." "Still your favorite sound?" he asked. I nodded. "Always." He handed me a small frame, a photograph he had taken of me, at the art center, standing among my students, smiling mid-sentence. At the bottom, he had written in tiny letters, "Peace looks good on you." For a while, we stood there silent, except for the rain tapping against the railing. Finally, I said, "You know, for years, I thought I'd never trust love again." "And now?" he asked. "Now I realize love isn't something you give or take, it's something you become." Kabir reached for my hand, his touch steady and familiar. We didn't need promises, we had presence, and that was enough. Later, before going to bed, I opened my old sketchbook, the one that had carried every piece of my heart since it first broke. On the first page were sketches of storms. On the last, blank space waiting for something new. I dipped my brush in gold paint and wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I chose to do with it." Then I closed the book, turned off the light, and listened to the rain outside. It no longer sounded like endings. It sounded like applause.